Because think about, when she creates Kyoshi Island, I mentioned this in another live stream, I was saying, like, I don't know much about geology, but she goes into the plates. I think it's the plates. Like, she's down in the plates. That is like a continental plate shifting, I don't know what I'm doing. Anyone who wasn't here last week, we read half of the iceberg chapter because it's 40 pages long. Usually my readings are like 18 to maybe like 16 to 20 minutes usually, and that one was like 40 minutes long. Today, so we read maybe around 22 pages. Today we're just reading like 13, 14 pages, so that's not too bad. Today I'm not recapping the previous chapter, I'm recapping the first half of this chapter, the iceberg. So, they were on Pung Pung, the bison. Love that name. Kyoshi had a nightmare. Kelsang is driving. And Genju and everyone else is on a boat following them to this iceberg. They get there. They're not allowed to have waterbenders. But they have one waterbender. And he put in colored contacts so that no one knows that he's a waterbender. Finally, someone understanding that eye color is important in terms of your bending. And see, his name is Amok. That's the waterbending guy. And he's theoretically he's Yoon's teacher for waterbending, but of course Yoon can't even firebend. Rip. They meet Tagaka. And she seems like very chill and polite, and they have a big dinner together, but like the Earth Kingdom captives are like serving them the dinner, so it's really tense and awkward. They start playing Pai Show, and it's like, it's fun, but like, And then she all of a sudden, I want to read this part because it's so funny. She goes, tell me, Avatar, are you enjoying yourself? And he's like, yeah. And then she's like, I'm so glad. I was convinced you were planning to kill me before the night was through. And everyone's just like, and then it gets really awkward. And then she's like, your teachers are war criminals. And she like lists off like all the bad stuff that Genju, all the supposed, alleged bad stuff that Genju, Haedon, and Kelsang have done. And it kind of sounds like what she said about Genju and Kelsang are accurate, but that Haedon did not on purpose kill anyone in Agni Kai. Like those were accidental Agni Kai kills. It's really tense. So then Genju and Yoon have a fight in the I almost said cave, have a fight in the tent, and then Kyoshi goes outside, talks to Kelsang, and he feels so bad about having killed all those people because he's an airbender, and as we know from Aang, airbenders respect all life, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, you've never let me down, and then she goes back to the camp, but first she runs into this soldier who is Tagaka's soldier, and he's like kind of, he's been drinking and it's really gross and tense, but he's like, but what he's saying, and I think this is important, he says, you look familiar, and he starts describing this woman with serpent tattoos, and he's like, you look just like her. I feel like that might be her family. And she's like, and she gets really defensive, and she kind of attacks him, she like chokes him, and it's like, you should not have attacked Tagaka's people. And yeah, and so then she goes back to the tent that she shares with Rangi, and so she's like, they're trying to sleep, and so Kyoshi's kind of just like talking because she's still like stressed, and she's like, I'm sure what she said about your mom wasn't true, and blah blah blah, and Rangi was like, of course it wasn't true, like that was her cousin that she killed by accident, like, and everyone at school was like being rude to me because they thought my mom is an assassin, and blah blah blah. And then Rangi starts crying, and she's like leaning into Kyoshi, and Kyoshi puts her arm around her, and then she just lets her sleep like that, even though her arm is getting, what's it called? Her arm is falling asleep, but she's like, I am not moving. Like, raise your hand if that is happening to you. I mean, what? Mom, that is not happening to me. Okay, so now we are going to finish the chapter. So chapter 7, part 2, the iceberg. Starting on page 88. They survived the night. There had been no sneak attack, no sudden chaos outside the tent as she'd feared. Kyoshi couldn't have slept more than an hour or two, but she'd never felt more alert and on edge in her life. When they breakfasted in their own camp at the base of the iceberg, she declined the overbrewed tea. Her teeth were already knocking together as it was. She looked for signs of trouble between Yoon and Jeonju, Rongyi and Haedan, but couldn't find any. She never understood how they managed to wound each other and then forgive each other so quickly. Wrongs meant something, even if they were inflicted by your family, especially if it was family. Kelsang stayed close by her during the preparations, but his presence only created more turbulence in her heart. Any minute now, they were going to walk up that hill and watch Yoon sign a treaty backed by the power vested in the Avatar. It's not me, Kyoshi thought to herself. Kelsang admitted there was hardly a chance. A chance is not the same thing as the truth. Jeonju signaled it was time to go and spoke a few words, but Kyoshi didn't hear them. He's jumping to conclusions because Jeonju sidelined him. He wants to be a bigger part of the Avatar's life, any Avatar's life, and I'm the closest thing to a daughter he has. She had to admit, the line of reasoning was a little self-important of her, but much less so than, say, being the Avatar. It made sense. Kelsang was human, prone to mistakes. The thought comforted her all the way to the top of the iceberg. The peak came to a natural plateau large enough to hold the key members of both delegations. For Yoon's side, that meant Jeonju, Haedan, Kelsang, Rongyi, Amak, and, despite the foolishness it implied, Kyoshi. Tagaka again deigned to come with only a pair of escorts. The mustached man was not part of her guard this time, thankfully. Whew, I was stressed about that. But one of the Earth Kingdom hostages, a young woman who had the sunburned mien, M-I-E-N, mien, who had the sunburned mien of a fishwife, accompanied the pirates. She silently carried a baggage pack on her shoulders and stared at the ground like her past and future were written on it. That is a beautiful sentence. The two sides faced each other over the flat surface. They were high enough up to overlook the smaller icebergs that drifted near the frozen mountain. I'm so stressed, you guys. I figured we'd use the traditional setting for such matters, Tagaka said, so please bear with me for a moment. The pirate queen wedged her feet in the snow and took a shouting breath. Her arms moved fluidly in the form of waterbending, but nothing happened. Hold on, she said. She tried again, waving her limbs with more speed and more strain. A circle rose haltingly out of the ice, the size of a table. It was very slow going. Is she not a good waterbender? Anyways, Kyoshi thought she heard a scoff come from Master Amak, but it could have been the creak of two smaller ice lumps sprouting on opposite sides of the table. Tagaka struggled mightily until they were tall enough to sit on. You'll have to forgive me, she said, out of breath. I'm not exactly the bender my father and grandfather were. Thank goodness. The Earth Kingdom woman opened her pack and quickly laid out a cloth over the table and cushions on the seats. With quick, delicate motions, she set up a slab inkstone, 2 brushes, and a tiny pitcher of water. Kyoshi's gut roiled as she watched the woman meticulously grind an ink stick against the stone. She was using the pianhai method, a ceremonial calligraphy setup that took a great deal of formal training and commoners normally never learned. Kyoshi only knew what it was from her proximity to Yoon. Did Tagaka beat the process into her, she thought? Or did she steal her away from her literature school in one of the larger cities? Once she had made enough ink, the woman stepped back without a word. Tagaka and Yoon sat down, each spreading a scroll across the ice table that contained the written terms that had been agreed upon so far. They spent an exhaustive amount of time checking that the copies matched, that phrasing was polite enough. Both Yoon and the Pirate Queen had an eye for small details, and neither of them wanted to lose the first battle. I object to your description of yourself as the waterborne guardian of the South Pole, Yoon said during one of the more heated exchanges. Why? Tagaka said. It's true. My warships are a buffer. I'm the only force keeping a hostile navy from sailing up to the shores of the Southern Water Tribe. The Southern Water Tribe hates you, Yoon said rather bluntly. Yes, well, politics are complicated, Tagaka said. I'll edit that to self-appointed guardian of the South Pole. I haven't abandoned my people, even if they've turned their backs on me. And on it went. After Tagaka's guards had begun to yawn openly, they leaned back from the scrolls. Everything seems to be in order, Yoon said. If you don't mind, I'd like to proceed straight away to the next stage. My mom's looking at me. I'm stressed. Oh my god, something's gonna happen. So straight away to the next stage. Verbal amendments. Tagaka smirked. Ooh, the real fun stuff. On the matter of the hostages from the southern coast of the Zeizhou province, as can be reasonably defined through proximity to Tuzin, taken from their homes sometime between the vernal equinox and the summer solstice, Yoon said. He paused. Kyoshi knew this was going to be hard on him. Rangi had explained the basics of how people were typically ransomed. At best, Yoon could free half of the captives by sacrificing the rest, letting Tagaka save face and retain leverage. He had to think of their lives in clinical terms. A higher percentage was better. His only goal, he would be a savior to some and doom the rest. I want them back, Yoon said. All of them. Avatar! Genju snapped. The earthbender was furious. This was obviously not what they'd talked about beforehand. Yoon raised his hand, showing the back of it to his master. Like this? Like... My mom went... I don't know. Sorry. Kyoshi could have sworn Yoon was enjoying himself right now. Okay. I want...
Oh, he's behind him.
Oh. Mom said he's behind him. Yeah. So he's like... Okay. I am a teacher. Okay. I'm not going to read comments. Sorry. I want every single man, woman, and child back, Yoon said. If you've sold them to other pirate crews, I want your dedicated assistance in finding them. If any have died under your care, I want their remains so their families can give them a proper burial. We can talk about the compensation you'll pay later. The masters, save for Kelsang, looked displeased. To them, these were the actions of a petulant child who didn't understand how the world worked. But Kyoshi had never loved her avatar more. This was what Yoon had wanted her to see when he begged her to come along. Her friend standing up for what was right. Excuse me. Her heart was ready to burst. Tagaka leaned back on her ice stool. Sure. Yoon blinked. His moment of glory and defiance yanked out from under him prematurely. You agree? I agree, Tagaka said. You can have all of the captives back. They're free. Every single one. A sob rang out in the air. It was the Earth Kingdom woman. Her stoic resolve broke, and she collapsed to her hands and knees, weeping loudly and openly. Neither Tagaka nor her men reprimanded her. Yoon didn't look at the woman, out of fear he might ruin her salvation with the wrong move. He waited for Tagaka to make a demand in return. He wasn't going to raise the price on her behalf. The captives are useless to me anyway, she said. She stared out to sea at the smaller icebergs surrounding them. Despite her earlier patience, she sounded incredibly bored all of a sudden. Out of 1,000 people or more, not one was a passable carpenter. I should have known better. I needed to go after people who lived among tall trees, not driftwood. Yoon frowned. You want carpenters? He said cautiously. She glanced at him, as if she were surprised he was still there. Boy, let me teach you a little fact about the pirate trade. Our power is measured in ships. We need timber and craftsmen who know how to work it. Building a proper navy is a generational effort. My peaceable cousins in the South Pole have a few heirloom sailing cutters, but otherwise have to make do with sealskin canoes. They'll never create a large, long-range war fleet because they simply don't have the trees. Tagaka turned and loomed over the table. So yes, she said, fixing him with her gaze. I want carpenters and trees and a port of my own to dock in so I can increase the size of my forces. And I know just where to get those things. Yokoya! Yoon shouted, a realization and an alert to the others in a single word. Tagaka raised her hand and made the slightest chopping motion with her fingers. Maybe like chopping a tree or something. Kyoshi heard... Oh, no, she's waterbending. Kyoshi heard a wet crunch and a gurgle of surprise. She looked around for the source of the strange noise. It was Master Amok.
Yeah.
Oh my god, you guys. Listen, it was Master Amok.
Mm-hmm.
He was bent backward over a stalagmite of ice, the bloody tip sprouting from his chest like a hideous stalk of grain. He stared at it, astonished, and slumped to the side. "Come now," Tagaka said. "You think I can't recognize kinfolk under a disguise?" "She just killed him." Here we go. The moments seemed to slowly stack up on each other like a tower of raw stone. Do you want to pull up a chair?
No.
I'm just over there. Each event in sequence piling higher and higher with no mortar to hold them together. A structure that was unstable, dreadful, headed toward a total and imminent collapse. The sudden movement of Tagaka's 2 escorts drew everyone's attention. But the 2 men only grabbed the Earth Kingdom woman by the arms and jumped back down the slope the way they'd come, dodging the blast of fire that Rangi managed to get off. They were the distraction. Pairs of hands burst from the surface of the ice, clutching at the ankles of everyone on Yoon's side. Waterbenders had been lying in wait below them the whole time. Rangi, Genju, and Heidon were dragged under the ice like they'd fallen through the crust of a frozen lake during the spring melt. Kyoshi's arms shot out, and she managed to arrest herself chest high on the surface. Her would-be captor hadn't made her tunnel large enough. Ha ha ha! Her tallness is coming in handy. Kelsang leaped into the air, avoiding the clutches of his underground assailant with an airbender's reflexes, and deployed the wings of his glider staff. Tagaka drew her gen and swung it on the downstroke at Yoon's neck, but the avatar didn't flinch. Almost too fast for Kyoshi to see, he slammed his fist into the only source of earth near them, the stone ink slab. It shattered into fragments and reformed as a glove around his hand. Go off. He caught Tagaka's blade as it made contact with his own skin. Kyoshi stamped down hard with her boot and felt a sickening crunch. Her foot stuck there as a bender whose face she'd broken refroze the water, imprisoning her lower half. Above the ice, Kyoshi had the perfect view of the Avatar and the Pirate Queen locked together in an immortal knot. They both looked happy that the charade was over. A trickle of Yoon's blood dripped off the edge of the blade. "Another thing you should know," Tagaka said, as she traded grins with Yoon, their muscles trembling with exertion. "I'm really not the waterbender my father was." With her free hand, she made a series of motions so fluid and complex that Kyoshi thought her fingers had telescoped to twice their length. A series of ear-splitting cracks echoed around them. There was a roar of ice and snow rushing into the sea. The smaller icebergs split and calved, revealing massive hollow spaces inside. As the chunks of ice drifted apart at Tagaka's command, the prows of Fifth Nation warships began to poke out, like the beaks of monstrous birds hatching from their eggshells. Yoon lost his balance at the sight and fell to the ground onto his back. Tagaka quickly blanketed him in ice, taking care to cover his stone-gloved hand. "What is this?" he yelled up at her. She wiped his blood off her sword with the crook of her elbow and resheathed it. "A backup plan? A head start on our way to Yokoya? A chance to show off? I've been pretending to be a weak bender for so long, I couldn't resist to be a little overdramatic." Waterbenders aboard the ships were already stilling the waves caused by the ice avalanches and driving their vessels forward. Other crew members scrambled along the masts like insects unfurling sails. They were pointed westward, toward home, where they would drive into fresh territories of the Earth Kingdom like a knife into an unprotected belly. "Stop the ships!" Yoon screamed into the sky. "Not me! The ships!" That was all he could get out before Tagaka covered his head completely in ice. Kyoshi didn't know whom he was talking to at first, though thought that in his desperation he was pleading with a spirit, but a low rush of air reminded her that someone was still free. Kelsang pulled up on his glider and beelined toward the flagship. "Not today, monk," Tagaka said. She lashed out with her arms, and a spray of icicles no bigger than sewing needles shot toward Kelsang. It was a fiendishly brilliant attack. The airbender could have easily dodged larger missiles, but Tagaka's projectiles were an enveloping storm. The delicate wings of his glider disintegrated, and he plunged toward the sea. There was no time to panic for Kelsang. Tagaka levitated the chunk of ice Yoon was buried in and threw it over the side of the iceberg toward her camp and leaped down after him. Kyoshi grit her teeth and pushed on the ice as hard as she could, her shoulders strained against her robes, both threatening to tear. The ice gripping her legs cracked and gave way, but not before shredding the parts of her skin not covered by her shirts. She lifted herself free and stumbled after Tagaka. She was lucky Yoon's prison had carved out a smooth path. Without it, she would have undoubtedly bashed her skull in, tumbling over the rough protrusions of ice. Kyoshi managed to slide down to the pirate camp, her wounds leaving a bloody trail on the slope behind her. Tagaka's men were busy loading their camp and themselves into longboats. An elegant cutter, one of the water tribe heirlooms she'd mentioned, waited for them off the coast of the iceberg. Only a few of the other pirates noticed Kyoshi. They started to pick up weapons, but Tagaka waved them off. Packing up was more of a priority than dealing with her. Give him back, Kyoshi gasped. Tagaka put a boot on the ice encasing Yoon and leaned on her knee. The Colossus speaks, she said, smiling. Give him back now. She meant to sound angry and desperate, but instead she came across as pitiful and hopeless as she felt inside. She wasn't sure if Yoon could breathe in there. Tagaka said. I saw what I needed to see in the boy's eyes. He's worth more as a hostage than an avatar. Trust me. She shoved Yoon off to the side with her foot, and the bile surged in Kyoshi's throat at the disrespectful gesture. But you, on the other hand, Tagaka said, you're a puzzle. I know you're not a fighter right now, that much is obvious, but I like your potential. I can't decide whether I should kill you now to be safe or take you with me. She took a step closer. Kyoshi, was it? How would you like a taste of true freedom? To go where you want and take what you're owed? Trust me, it's a better life than whatever dirt scratch existence you've had on land. Kyoshi knew her answer. It was the same one she would have given as a starving 7-year-old child. I would never become a Dao Fei, Kyoshi said, trying as hard as possible to turn the word into a curse. Pretending to be a leader and an important person when you're nothing but a murderous slaver. You're the lowest form of life I know. Tagaka frowned and drew her sword. The metal hissed against the scabbard. She wanted Kyoshi to feel cold death sliding between her ribs, instead of being stuffed out quickly by water. Kyoshi stood her ground. Give me the avatar, she repeated, or I will put you down like the beast you are. I really feel like she's gonna bend. Like, it's gonna be wild. Okay. Sorry. Tagaka spread her arms wide, telling her to look around them at the field of ice they were standing on. Standing on. With what, little girl from the Earth Kingdom? She asked. With what? It was a good question, one that Kyoshi knew she couldn't have answered herself. But she was suddenly gripped with the overwhelming sensation that right now, in her time of desperate need, her voice wouldn't be alone. I'm trying not to read it. I'm like slightly glancing ahead. I'm trying to stay in the sentence that I'm in. Her hands felt guided. She didn't fully understand, nor was she completely in control, but she trusted. Kyoshi braced her stomach, filled her lungs, and slammed her feet into the crowding bridge stance. Echoes of power rippled from her movement, 100-fold iterations of herself stamping on the ice. She was somehow both leading and being led by an army of benders. A column of gray stone seafloor exploded up from the surface of the ocean. It caught the hull of Tagaka's cutter and listed the ship to the side, tearing wooden planks off the frame as easily as paper off a kite. A wave of displaced water swept over the iceberg, knocking pirates off their feet and smashing crates to splinters. Out of self-preservation, Tagaka reflexively raised a waist-high wall of ice, damming and diverting the surge. But the barrier protected Kyoshi as well, giving her time to attack again. She leaped straight into the air and landed with her fists on the ice. Farther out, the sea boiled. Screams came from the lead warships as more crags of basalt rose in their path. The bowsprits of the vessels that couldn't turn in time snapped like twigs. The groan of timber shattering against rock filled the air, as hideous as a chorus of wounded animals. Kyoshi dropped to her knees, panting and heaving. She'd meant to keep going, to bring the earth close enough to defend herself, but the effort had immediately sapped her to the point where she could barely raise her head. Tagaka turned around, her face so controlled over the past 2 days, spasmed in every direction. What in the name of the spirits? She whispered as she flipped her gen over for a downward stab. The speed at which Tagaka moved to kill her made it clear that she'd be fine living without an answer. "Kyoshi, stay low." Kyoshi instinctively obeyed Rangi's voice and flattened herself out. She heard and felt the scorch of a fire blast travel over her, knocking Tagaka away. With a mighty roar, pong pong strapped the iceberg. Rangi and Heidan blasting flame from the bisons left and right, scattering the pirates as they attempted to regroup. Quick sideline. Sky Bison saved the day all the time. Shout out to Sky Bison. Genju handled, the chapter's almost over. Genju handled Pung Pung's reins with the skill of an air nomad, spinning her around for perfectly aimed tail shots of wind that drove away clouds of arrows and thrown spears. Kyoshi had no idea how they'd escaped the ice, but if any three people had the power and resourcefulness to pull it off, it was them. The fight wasn't over. Some of Tagaka's fleet had made it past Kyoshi's obstacles, and from the nearby sinking ships, a few waterbenders declined to panic like their fellows. They dove into the water instead, generating high-speed waves that carried them toward Tagaka, her elite guard coming to rescue her. Rangi and Heidan jumped down and barraged English sucks, and barraged the pirate queen with flame that she was forced to block with sheets of water. Rangi's face was covered in blood, and her mother had only one good arm, but they fought in perfect coordination, leaving Tagaka no gaps to mount an offense. Or an offense, whatever. "We'll handle the waterbenders," Heidan shouted over her shoulder. "Stop the ships!" Genju took a look at the stone monoliths that Kyoshi had raised from the sea floor, and then at her. In the heat of battle, he chose to pause. He stared hard at Kyoshi, almost as if he were doing sums in his head. "Genju!" Heidan screamed. He snapped out of his haze and took Pung Pung back up. They flew toward the nearest formation of stone. Without warning, Genju let go of the reins and jumped off the bison in midair. Kyoshi thought he'd gone mad. He proved her wrong. She'd never seen Genju earthbend before, had only heard Yoon and the staff describe his personal style as different, unusual, more like a lion dance at the New Year, Auntie Mui once said, fanning herself with a dreamy smile on her face. Stable below and wild on top. Whoa, Auntie Mui. Whoa. He hadn't been able to earthbend on the iceberg, but now Kyoshi had provided him with all of his element that he needed. As Genju fell, flat panes of stone peeled off the crag and flew up to meet him. They arranged themselves into a manic architectural construction with broad daylight showing through the triangular gaps, a steep ramp that he landed on without losing his momentum. He sprinted toward the escaping ships in a direction he had no room to go. But as he ran, his arms coiled and whipped around him like they had minds of their own. He flicked his fists, using minute twists of his waist, and countless sheets of rock fastened themselves into a bridge under his feet. Genju never broke stride as he traveled on thin air, suspended by his on-the-fly earthworks. Yo! Fire blasts and water sprouts shot up from the benders manning the ships. Genju nimbly leaped and slid over them. The ones aimed at the stone itself did surprisingly little damage, as the structure was composed of chaotic, redundant braces. He raced ahead of the lead ship, crossing its path with his bridge. Right as Kyoshi thought he'd extended too far, that he'd run out of stone and thinned his support beyond what it could hold, he leaped to safety, landing on top of a nearby ice floe. The precarious, unnatural assembly began to crumble without Genju's bending to keep it up. First, the individual pieces began to flake off. Chunks of falling rock bombarded the lead ship from high above, sending the crew members diving for cover as the wooden deck punctured like leather before an awl. But their suffering had only begun. The base of the bridge simply let itself go, bridging the entire line of stone down across the prow. The ship's aft was levered out of the waterline, exposing the rudder and barnacled keel. The rest of the squadron didn't have time to turn. One follower angled away from the disaster. It managed to avoid crashing its hull, but the change of direction caused the vessel to tilt sharply to the side. The tip of its rigging caught on the wreckage, and then the ship was beheaded of its masts and sails. The wooden pillars snapped off, a child's toy breaking at its weakest points. The last remaining warship, bringing up the rear, might have made it out, assuming some dazzling feat of heroic seamanship. Instead, it wisely decided to drop anchor and call it quits. If Tagaka's power was in her fleet, then the Avatar's companions had destroyed it. Now they just had to live long enough to claim their victory. You did good, kid, said a man with a husky voice and accent like Master Amat's. They'll be telling stories about this for a long time. Kyoshi spun around, afraid a pirate had gotten the drop on her, but there was no one there. Yes! The motion made her dizzy, too dizzy. She sank to her knees, a drawn-out, lengthy process, and slumped onto the ice. And that is the end of Chapter 7, The Iceberg. That was Korok. Korok spoke to her. Ooh, boy.
So I have a comment.
She has a comment.
So, A, isn't that a fabulous chapter? I mean, should I look over there or look over there?
You can go back.
Okay. A, that's a fabulous chapter. B, they're setting up her propensity for moving large land masses because she cuts that whole island away from the continent. So they're setting that up. She brought the earth from the bottom of the ocean up to the thing. So it's a fabulous setup to show us what she can do. You know? Okay.
Crazy. Oh. Okay, so we started on page 88. Whew. Okay, so they survived the night. There was no sneak attack. They're getting ready for the negotiations. Tagaka pretends to be a bad waterbender, but she's not. And so she makes a table out of the ice. They sit down for the negotiations. It's all going smoothly. He brings up the hostages, and he's like, I want all of them. And, like, Heidan and Genju are like, you're just supposed to say, like, half of them or, like, 2/3 or something. Don't say all of them. And she's just like, no. And then they all start fighting. It's like, oh my God. No, that's not, actually, I lied. She doesn't say no. She says, sure, but in return, I want Yokoya. And he's like, no. And then she freaking kills Master Amak, who's from the Northern Water Tribe, so he has a Northern Water Tribe accent. Keep that in mind. And then there's just fighting. Heidan, Rangi, Genju get pulled under the ice, but they didn't have enough room to grab Kyoshi, and Kelsang leaps into the air like an airbender, because he's an airbender. She starts fighting one-on-one with Yoon, who does some cool earthbending and makes like a little armor fist like Toph would have done. But then she like puts him in ice, and Kyoshi's like, oh God, can he even breathe? And so then they like go down the thing, and so then she follows after them, and she's like bleeding, and then she's like, give him back. And Tagaka's just like, this girl has potential. She's like, do you want to join me? And Kyoshi's like, no. And Tagaka's like, okay, I'll kill you then. Kyoshi's like, you thought. And she bends the seafloor up from the bottom of the ocean. So that's still Earth, technically. So she's not giving up away that she's the Avatar. And everyone's like, what the? And then she tries to kill her again, and then Rangi yells, Kyoshi, stay low! And Kyoshi's like, and then Rangi, Heidan, Pung, and Genju somehow escaped, and they come to the rescue. They just destroy all the ships. I don't really know what I read, because I was focusing on pronouncing things correctly, so I missed a lot of details, but it's exciting. And then at the end of the chapter, I'm going to reread this, because... You did good, kid, said a man with a husky voice and an accent like Master Amat. They'll be telling stories about this for a long time. Kyoshi spun around, afraid a pirate had gotten the drop on her, but there was no one there. The motion made her dizzy. And then she falls down. That's Korok. That's fully Korok. It's Korok. There's no doubt about it. I think I briefly saw someone say, was it the Avatar state? I don't think that was the Avatar state. Because it would have said something about her eyes glow. Like Tagaka would have had a bigger reaction. She was freaked out at how good Kyoshi was at bending, but she would have said something like, the Avatar, or you tricked me, or, she would have had a reaction if she had gone into the Avatar state. And I feel like you might need to learn, I think... The first couple times that well, actually, that's not true. Aang did it by accident. I take it back. It's not necessarily a conscious thing. I think she did that fully by herself. And as my mom mentioned when she was like, I just have a comment. It's excellent foreshadowing for when she creates Kyoshi Island. They're showing us that just naturally, she is naturally such a powerful bender that she literally raises the seafloor up. Oh, Mom, do you want to sing Happy Birthday to Spencer? Okay. We're singing Spencer. 1, 2, wait, for this one, because they're on the live stream, let's do the live stream. 1, 2, everyone sing with us. 3. Happy birthday to you.
Are you going to go up?
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Spencer. Happy birthday to you.
Yay. Okay. Rate Appa 1 to 10. Appa is a 20 on a scale of 1 to 10. And Pong Pong is like a 12 already. We'll probably get even higher. And Oogie's a 10. Just because I have no opinion about Oogie, but all Sky Bison are a 10 on the scale of 1 to 10. Rate Zuko 1 to 10. I'm gonna give Zuko a 16 out of 10 because that's the age that he is during the series. My mom is laughing at me. I found out that the Earthbender in the title sequence isn't the boulder. I thought it was the boulder. It's Roku's earthbending teacher. The boulder is not in the title sequence. That's so funny. I was hoping that the crazy bending that would happen today would be her like fire bending or something. So that had been my prediction, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe she actually hasn't fire bent before. And maybe the reason she was hesitant to earthbend way back in the second chapter was because she's just a really strong bender. Maybe she doesn't really have control over her bending and she can just do those crazy things like she did earlier. You know what? That's so true. She doesn't believe that she's the Avatar. I was thinking she was so in denial and that one time she accidentally fire bent, but she was like, that wasn't me. But you're right. It makes more sense that she hasn't fire bent before because she really, really does not believe that she's the Avatar. She really is like, no. Ergo whoosh. It's really interesting to have different mediums, I will say. While I would love to see this visually, it's kind of refreshing to just have a novel. Because even the comics, we get to see everything visually, but now I'm really picturing everyone myself. But you have these great fan artists, and I wish I could remember their name. There's someone on Instagram whose fan art was the basis for the official art of the second novel for Rangi. And their fan art is so good, but I have to keep not looking at it because it's spoilers for this and for Shadow of Kyoshi. All right, folks, I'm going to end because I got to go to Jenny Kwan's watch party. I can't believe I'm saying those words. What an icon. She's so nice, you guys. Everyone, go follow Jenny Kwan on TikTok and Instagram. The voice of Suki. And the voice of... She played Yue in the Ember Island Players. So for that 2 seconds when Yue and Sokka are in the scene of the Ember Island Players, that's actually Jenny Kwan. Hilarious. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for coming. I will see you next week. Bra, ha, ha. Shkooda, bra. Okay.